Greetings, CinemaBlend fans, and welcome to HeroBlend number 159. I am your host, events editor Eric Eisenberg, and I am very excited for this week's show, brought to you by the This Movie Changed Me podcast by On Being Studio, where each episode has a guest telling the story of how a movie changed their life. You can subscribe using the link in the comments and find their latest episode about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. But this is HeroBlend, and for this episode, we are going to talk all about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. For those of you who have not kind of been paying attention to the latest updates that we've heard in the past week or so, Marvel, while they have not yet said what their Phase 4 titles are going to be, they are keeping that under very, very tight wraps. What they have done is carved out some very key release dates, basically laying out the entirety of what we can expect Phase 4 to be. So for those of you who have been keeping account, Phase 1 was 6 movies, Phase 2 was 6 movies, Phase 3 was bumped up to 10 movies, and it looks like Marvel Cinematic Universe Phase 4 is going to be 10 movies as well. Just to kind of run them all down, what we know so far, we have Spider-Man 2 set to come out on July 5th, 2019, aka the first movie after Avengers 4. Following that, we have 3 movies coming out in 2020, one on May 1st, one on July 31st, one on November 6th, 3 more in 2021, May 7th, July 30th, November 5th, and then again 3 more in 2022, February 18th, May 6th, and July 29th. That is obviously a lot of future planning. That being said, a few years ago, Kevin Feige, Marvel Studios' president, went on the record saying that they really do have an idea of what they're doing up until, I believe he said 2024. So, they know what they're doing. It's just kind of being kept a mystery to us. So I wanted to use this episode to have a kind of open discussion with all you lovely fans about what you kind of want to see in Phase 4, what you want to kind of be featured as the titles that come out. And obviously there are just a few options to get that done. For example, there are a few sequels, such as we expect a Doctor Strange sequel to come down the pike at some point. While we have not seen Captain Marvel, presumably the idea is not just to keep her as one solo movie set back in the 90s. I mean, we kind of have to talk about Black Panther having another movie, considering that this is now going to be considered one of the most successful films of all time. You have Ant-Man and the Wasp, who is later this year is going to have the second movie in what we can probably assume is going to be a trilogy. But all that, and yes, that is a lot right there, but you have to balance it with what James Gunn has said about working with Marvel about developing the cosmic side of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So we not only have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which is currently vaguely set for some point in the year 2020. It has not been confirmed 100%, though we can probably say it's the May 1st date, given the fact that last year we saw Guardians come out in May. Subject to change, who knows? Again, they could plan anything, it's really hard to say. But even within that, there are, super big, characters in the cosmic realm that we could certainly see get their own movies. One thing, there's characters like Nova, which is a character that fans have been just craving for years and years and years. Adam Warlock, who is a character who, interestingly, James Gunn introduced in the post-credits scene of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but at the same time, has said a few months ago, and actually during an interview that I did with him, that just because it's in the post-credit sequence doesn't mean that it's guaranteed for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So Adam Warlock, I mean, if he's not necessarily going to be in that sequel, is it possible that he could wind up with his own solo adventure? Totally possible. Also on the table is a Rocket and Groot movie. Why not? I mean, those two characters have certainly proved their popularity. We know that the Guardians team as we know them is not going to exist past Volume 3. So why not just give them their own little side adventure where you can really kind of dig into where they came from? So we have a question from Matt Oliver who says, I know it's a long shot, but I want to see XMen and Fantastic Four. That is, of course, I expected that to be a major topic of conversation during this week's show. And I have, believe it or not, thoughts about that. So I will first start by just talking about the Fantastic Four, if not just because I think of the two, of course, for those who don't know, just to quickly fill this in, a couple months ago, it was officially announced that the Walt Disney Company, aka the owners of Marvel Studios, have purchased 20th Century Fox, which for the longest time has been the owners of the rights to both the X-Men and Fantastic Four characters. And the expectation is that once the deal is completed and signed, which, by the way, it is not just yet, that they will find a way to introduce the Fantastic Four and the X-Men into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, there are interesting complications that come with both sides of this, with both the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. Though, that being said, I'd say the most important thing in all of this is that the Fantastic Four are certainly in a much better position to be introduced to the Marvel Cinematic Universe than the X-Men currently are. That a lot of that just ties into the fact that to date, Fantastic Four movies just really haven't worked. You had the Tim Story movies that came out back in the mid-aughts. You had the Josh Trank film that came out in 2015, which really just was a complete disaster. And with the idea of Marvel Studios getting the rights back to the Fantastic Four, I think that the kind of best move, maybe not the best move, but a certain approach that they could take would be essentially what they did with Spider-Man Homecoming, which is to say maybe, or would say with Spider-Man, which is to say maybe include them in another movie first, potentially like get them like toe dipped a little bit into the MCU, followed by a solo film that really explores what they can possibly do. And like Spider-Man Homecoming, that may be a project that is kind of just dumped into the middle of the schedule. It might not even be one of the dates that already exist, but I certainly think that is on the table. As for the X-Men, though, that franchise is still, it's going strong. I mean, Deadpool 2 is coming out in just a couple of weeks at this point and is expected to be an absolutely enormous blockbuster. You have X-Men Dark Phoenix coming out in November. You have New Mutants. You have Gambit. You have Silver Surfer. There are big plans that Fox has for these characters in the next couple of years. And just because of those plans, it's really dangerous to just take what they're all doing and then say, let's just mash it together with the Marvel Cinematic Universe and see what happens. That's kind of a recipe for disaster, especially because Marvel Studios is so great at following a strict plan. So, if I had my druthers, if I were running the show at Marvel Studios, I'd say that it'd be much more likely to see Fantastic Four appear in Phase 4. Kind of appropriate. While X-Men, any kind of crossover for them would probably be, I guess, in 2023, which would give them time to kind of decide how they actually want to introduce the X-Men and kind of just the machinations that they want to put together so that those two universes can become one, or if they're going to do a total reboot. All options on the table. We have a question from Joshua who says, Silver Surfer, now that Disney has the rights back from Fox. That is, again, actually, Silver Surfer is an interesting subject because we just heard recently that Fox is considering development of a Silver Surfer solo film. They're working on that, as well as Noah Hawley is developing a Doctor Doom movie, which I think that, just to kind of go back to what I was just saying about the Fantastic Four, that certainly puts them in a complicated situation, because if, let's say that this Noah Hawley Doom movie and the Silver Surfer movie work out tremendously well. Let's say that people absolutely love them, and then they have to be introduced to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, does that mean that you take the Doom that Noah Hawley, who, by the way, I think is an amazingly creative guy, he already has a taste of the comic book aesthetic with Legion, which, if you're not watching it, is about to start its second season, is one of the best shows on television, but also Fargo, which, just as a huge Coen Brothers fan, it is just such a wonderful celebration of everything that story represents. And so I have full faith that Noah Hawley will deliver a really great Doctor Doom movie. The question is then, how do you potentially integrate him into the Marvel Cinematic Universe? The same thing with the Silver Surfer. So if you have the Silver Surfer movie be released by Fox, have him go on his own adventure, does that interfere with any plans that Fox or that Marvel might actually have to work Silver Surfer into some kind of plans they have, especially because his character is so closely associated with the Fantastic Four? That is a tricky situation, and I mean, it makes it really hard to determine any kind of quote unquote Fox properties that may show up in Phase 4. It's very possible that we won't see, especially because this whole deal is not complete yet. It's entirely possible that it's going to be still a few years before we get to see any kind of major fallout franchise-wise. From Deshaun King, he asks, is there a need for a Black Widow movie in Phase 4? I think it's unnecessary. I personally would actually like to see a Black Widow movie, just because I think that there is a story to tell with that character that cannot be told with any other characters in the Marvel Universe. I think that, and even more importantly than that, I think that there is no other character other than Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow who has legitimately improved with every single appearance that they've had in this franchise. Iron Man 2 is obviously one of the more controversial films within this canon. Some people it kind of sets a baseline for who Black Widow is. It kind of sets up her duplicity, yada yada. But moving into Avengers, where like we kind of get to develop her relationship with Hawkeye, moving into Captain America: The Winter Soldier, where she's this perfect representation of kind of gray moral areas in ethics, in perfect contrast to the black and white morality of Captain America. Then, of course, in Civil War, you kind of get the combination of everything that we've had up to that point, with both that gray morality and the kind of duplicitousness. And it's just, I really do think there is a story to tell with that character, and just the fact that Scarlett Johansson has done such a great job makes me want to see what she would potentially bring to the table with that idea. Of course, there are, again, as I mentioned earlier in the show, so many other potential projects, it's kind of hard to know when it would fit in, but if it is something that is legitimately on the table, which, by the way, it sounds like it is something I'd honestly want to see. From Trevor Finnegan, who says, I think that a Blade reboot would be cool with Marvel at the helm. I am totally all about getting Blade back into the mix. I think that, while Fox is kind of dabbling into the horror comic book era, like with their New Mutants movie, which is now coming out in 2019. I think that would be an amazing opportunity for Fox to kind of delve into what is an incredibly important and vital part of Marvel Comics history. During the 50s, they weren't about superheroes. They were all about the monsters. And I feel like bringing Blade into the mix, I even wrote a feature about diverse heroes that I think should be introduced to the Marvel Universe. And in my section about Blade, I personally would love to see them go full on tribute back to the origins of Blade in the Marvel Universe, and actually have it set back in 18th or 19th century Transylvania, and have Blade taking on Dracula. That's how it started in Marvel Comics, and that'd be a really cool adventure. And also it just takes advantage of Blade's kind of vampireness and immortality and all that kind of nature. Whether or not you bring back Wesley Snipes, I guess, is an important question to consider. The fact that he's just a little bit older than he was back in 1998, I want to say, aka 20 years ago, probably means that he might not be the best candidate to play in a half vampire character. There might be someone younger that is kind of more ready for that part and could potentially perpetuate it into the future of this franchise. But if we're just talking about Blade as a character, that is absolutely something I'd like to see. If we are just, I'd actually also love to just talk about the cosmic side of this whole franchise thing, because there was, again, the first Phase 4 title that was ever officially announced was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which James Gunn announced on Facebook with the kind of writer, I use that word with choice, with the idea that he would continue working with Marvel Studios to develop the cosmic side of this franchise. And I am curious, this is another actual feature that you can find on CinemaBlend that I wrote, about how that balance is going to occur if you have 10 movies that make up Phase 4. Are 5 of them going to be cosmic while 5 of them are going to be Earth-based? I don't know how you pull off that split. But that being said, if you kind of look at where the franchise is going from here, one thing that I've just been personally speculating about is the possibility of how you could fit Nova into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is, you think about Thanos, he's going to be heading to Xandar at some point in Infinity War or Avengers 4 to collect the Power Stone, which is being stored by the Nova Corps. And you know what? In that process, he might wind up completely annihilating the entire planet, which is basically how Richard Rider and his whole Nova story during the Annihilation crossover event came to be. And I think that would be a fantastic character that could just roam the cosmos. Hell, you could pair him up with Captain Marvel at some point, which I think is actually another good point, which is Captain Marvel, after being an Earthbound hero for her first solo movie, she could easily graduate into the cosmos, because she rides that line all the time in the comics. And of course, as I mentioned, I'd like to see Adam Warlock kind of come into the mix, not to mention the other Guardians of the Galaxy team, the original one with Sylvester Stallone and Michelle Yeoh and all these awesome and Ving Rhames. And I'd personally love to see them all potentially come into play in their own solo film. It's, I guess, really the ultimate problem that Marvel has at this point is there's too much good stuff to kind of go through. There is so many cool avenues that they could travel down, that it's almost too bad they only have capacity to do potentially 10 movies in Phase 4. Could we eventually get to a point with 4 movies? Hard to say. From Eric Kutcher, who asks, will they have an Agent Carter movie that begins where the series ended? Fortunately, I do not really see much of a future for Agent Carter. as far as like a continuation from her television series. I actually think that her show was great. Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely were the writers behind the entire Captain America trilogy and the writers of Captain America or Avengers Infinity War and Avengers 4. They were the showrunners on that. They created it. I think they did a fantastic job. Unfortunately, I think season 2 is where that storyline is going to end. We may see the character come back in Infinity War. In fact, I have a certain pet theory that involves Captain America being sent back in time to kind of live his life out with her, which I think would be absolutely wonderful. But as far as the kind of continuation of the series specifically, I think, unfortunately, we have to think that's not going to happen. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank the This Movie Changed Me podcast, which you can now subscribe to episodes on iTunes. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Of course, we will be back, as we always are, every Thursday here on the CinemaBlend Facebook page at 1 p.m. PST, 4 p.m. EST. I hope you join us for next week's show, and I'll see you then. Have a good one.